Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss fantasy Formula 1. In today's video we have a lot of things to discuss. I'm not going to dilly-daddle too much. I just want to briefly say thank you if you were at the deadline stream this weekend in Spain, and I'm announcing now that I'm doing another deadline stream and a bonus stream on Friday. So I'm doing a sprint quali watch along on Friday for the sprint qualifying, where we will discuss free practice 1 and watch the sprint qualifying together and make some decisions then. And then I'm doing a deadline stream on the Saturday, and that will be at 10 a.m. Central Eastern Standard Time, because, well, that's when the deadline is. The deadline is at the sprint start. So the sprint start is at 2, I believe. No, it's at 12. The sprint start is at 12, which means you need to have your team ready by then, which means we're doing the deadline stream in the AM. So don't miss the deadline this week. It's not at qualifying, it's at the sprint. Don't forget that. This is one of those weeks where you do not want to miss the deadline. But remember as well that since it's a sprint race and the sprint formula has changed for this year's Formula 1 season, you can watch the sprint qualifying before making your transfer. So do not make any transfers yet. Wait until after sprint qualifying, because that sprint qualifying will give us a lot of hints on where the different teams lie. And especially among the top 4, where it's now so close and so hard to predict who's going to come out on top, you definitely need to wait with your transfers. Without further ado, let's get into talking about my team in Spain and what my team is likely to look like in Austria. Lando Norris certainly did the deed for me this weekend in Spain, and I finished on a pretty big 230 points, which is actually my highest points total in a non-sprint weekend so far this season. As you can see in Miami, you know, the points were pretty high because it's a sprint weekend, but my highest so far was actually on the opening weekend in Bahrain, where I got 220 points. And the 230 points I got in Spain is the highest I've gotten so far this season on a non-sprint weekend. And I mean, Lando Norris did most of the heavy lifting. He got very lucky to get not only the driver of the day, but also the fastest lap. I can sort of take credit for the driver of the day points because I've been pushing Lando Norris over Max Verstappen as a F1 fantasy option for a few weeks now. But him getting that fastest lap on top of that, that's definitely all luck. I cannot claim that at all. Right now, at least for this season, when the top 4 teams are so evenly matched, Max Verstappen can no longer do a free pit stop to get the fastest lap every single race. So the fastest lap just goes to whoever is at the wrong or right end of the strategy for that race. It's usually whoever pits last, has the freshest tires towards the end. It's been Hamilton and Mercedes for a couple races now. This time around, it was Lando Norris with the special strategy he was on. It could have also been Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc pitted after Lando onto the softs. So those of you who kept faith in Charles Leclerc should probably count yourself pretty unlucky that he could not bag that fastest lap point. But he was conserving more than Lando was. The Ferrari tire degradation still seems to be somewhat of an issue. And he was managing more than what Lando was. However, it wasn't all, you know, sunshine and rainbows in my team. Mercedes did really well once again. Ferrari did decently, at least, you know, somewhat well. But all of my C-tier assets, and this is the strategy I'm on a single premium driver strategy in Lando Norris. I am relying on my C-tiers to do the work for me. And on face value, they did pretty well. They got 4, 4, 4, and 6 points. That is a good weekend. I didn't get any negatives, no DNFs that also contributed to my 230-point haul. But unfortunately, because there were no DNFs, the cutoff, the half of the average driver score was actually rounded to 7, which means a C-tier asset needed 7 points to increase in price, which has led to this, you know, quite unfortunate situation where all my C-tier drivers decreased 0.1 million. And in fact, most C-tier drivers decreased. The only 2 C-tier drivers who got enough points to increase in price was Pierre Gasly and Daniel Ricciardo. And if you look at the points that they got, Pierre Gasly was right on the money. He got exactly 7 points, even though he had a really good race and finished 9th. And then you have Daniel Ricciardo, who had another decent race. He also just got 7 points. So if the average points have been slightly higher. If there have been a couple more overtakes, the average cutoff could have been as high as 8. And in that case, all C tiers would have decreased in price despite none of them DNFing. The sort of takeaway for this, and it's something that I hadn't really considered before, is that the C tier drivers are really bad in races where there aren't DNFs. Down here you have the average scores so far this season, and you know the sprint races obviously had a higher cutoff than 7 because there are more points on the table, but we don't really count them for this. This was the highest average score so far. Actually, Bahrain also had a cutoff of 7 because it was above 12. If it's on 12.0, the average score, then the cutoff is 6, but they actually round it in such a way that 12.1, the average then becomes 7. So the Bahrain and Spanish Grand Prix had the same cutoff for those C tier assets. It's, you know, for example, if you remember in Bahrain, Gasly decreased in price while Ocon increased, the difference between 6 and 7 points, and that swing of 0.6 million is pretty massive. And coincidentally, the other race that had such a high average score that wasn't a sprint weekend was Bahrain, where, if you remember, there were also no DNFs. So the C tier assets, the single premium strategy that I'm on with Lando Norris only, and 4 premium C tier assets, I guess, is bad in races with no DNFs. We're going to talk a bit about that later. But in total, it was a positive week for me. I mean, I increased about 3,000 from an overall rank of about 12k up to an overall rank of, you know, slightly below 9k. So it's a 3,000 place green arrow, and I'll definitely take that after last weekend with the Ferrari disaster in Canada. We now move on to some more interesting statistics and data from the Spanish Grand Prix before jumping into what my plans are for the Austrian Grand Prix. Before we continue on with this video, I just want to remind you to subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost anything, and if you're here listening to me yap, you are probably enjoying it, right? There's a lot more content on the way. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers, so that would be pretty cool. So don't forget to subscribe, and if you are here this far into the video, why not like the video too? It helps out a ton, and it doesn't cost you anything. Sometimes when making these videos or preparing for these videos, I have a preconceived idea, and that idea, when looking at the stats, turns out to be wrong, but I still want to share this finding, right? So I talked about the C tier problem. The C tier problem being that when no driver DNFs, they are way less reliable for price increases. And that's definitely true, right? Because these C tier assets don't get that many points, meaning that if no one DNFs, that 1 point difference can be the difference between 0.6 million. So even a driver such as Hulkenberg, such as Stroll, who got 6 points in Spain, had just one driver DNF'd, that might have been enough to push the average points total down enough to where they would have increased in price, right? So since that 1 point difference can make or break a C tier asset, you want to have C tier assets that are good in races where DNFs are more likely to happen. Now, what I thought would be the case is that in Europe, on these proper racing tracks, that we would see less DNFs than, you know, the rest of the calendar, but that's actually not the case in 2022 and 2023. The average DNFs actually increase when we get to the European races. So perhaps now when we get to those European proper circuits, this does not include Monaco, by the way, because that's a street track and there's usually a lot of DNFs in Monaco, and there's also not a lot of overtakes in Monaco. Monaco's an outlier, ignore Monaco. So now that we get to Europe, perhaps these C tier assets are going to be better. I mean, we didn't see any in Spain, but perhaps these DNFs are coming, right? Which brings me to the second problem. I call it the Sargeant problem. Now, Logan Sargeant is the only driver on the grid to, over the course of the 2024 season, not to have increased in price in total, right? His total price increase from the start of the game in, you know, Bahrain back in February is 0.0. He started the game, he started the season at 5.5 million, and over the course of this season, he has not increased in price. Meanwhile, the average driver price increase so far this year is approximately 2 million. Logan Sargeant is getting left in the dust, right? Another negative with Sargeant is that Sargeant teams, because of this reason, are very, very inflexible, right? Due to the difference in price between Sargeant and the nearest price driver, currently show at 7.8 million. I've been talking on this channel a lot in the recent weeks between, the difference between the single B or single A lineup versus the 2B, the 2 premium driver lineup. And the problem with the 2B is this Sargeant problem. If you want to have the best 2B drivers, you almost have to put Sargeant in, right? The good thing with Sargeant is that his price point allows you to afford those better 2B or 1A, 1B combinations, such as a Norris and a Leclerc or similar. But the bad things with Sargeant is that I don't see him increasing in price, right? If we put the threshold for a C-tier asset to increase in price at roughly 6 points, he's only reached that twice this season. How is he, and that's not including sprint races, sorry. How are we going to trust Sargeant to keep increasing in price? Now, you might say, well, the 2B lineup is good enough that having a Sargeant that is both DNF prone and just not going to increase in price, keep dropping in price, making you even more inflexible, is still worth it, having those two B tier assets. But what I say instead is that if you can get to a 2B lineup without Sargeant, that is where the money lies. That is where the value of the 2B lineup lies, when you can skip the Logan Sargeant. I actually think the single B lineup or the single A lineup is stronger when you can avoid Logan Sargeant. Logan Sargeant is currently the worst driver on the grid, and unless there's a lot of DNFs and he's not a part of them, he is going to keep dropping 0.1 or 0.2 million in price. He's finishing last, he's not gaining positions, he's not doing overtakes, he's just not good in F1 fantasy right now, unfortunately. Not to mention that the Williams itself, the car itself, is pretty bad right now. Even Albon is struggling on a lot of circuits. This leads me into something that needs to be discussed from the Spanish Grand Prix. The driver of the day problem. There's a lot of problems right now. I don't think anyone has missed driver of the day, right? Lando Norris has 5 of the last 6 driver of the days. Does he deserve them all? Probably not. I think arguably he deserves 2, maybe 3 at most of these driver of the days. You can make a point for him being decent at the Spanish Grand Prix. I don't think Lando Norris had a bad race. He made one mistake, which probably cost him the win. But I think, in my opinion, there were 2 drivers, definitely, probably 3 drivers, actually, that deserved driver of the day over Lando Norris. I think it was Max Verstappen, who should have been the driver of the day, in my opinion. It's Lewis Hamilton, who got his P3 finally and has, worked his way up with that car. Definitely deserves it over Lando. And then also Pierre Gasly, who drove an amazing race, finishing P9, right? I think all 3 of these drivers deserve driver of the day ahead of Norris, but because of it being just a popularity contest, Norris just keeps getting it. And I've been saying this for a while. Norris if he just gets P2, he is driver of the day. People just love seeing Lando Norris on the podium, and those 10 points really, really matter. Not only is he 4.8 million cheaper than Max Verstappen, but he is outscoring Max Verstappen too, even though Max Verstappen keeps winning most of the races, right? So the point combination between these different things, between the Sargeant problem, the 2B, single B lineup, and the driver of the day problem, is that Norris is what can allow you to skip out on someone like Logan Sargeant. I think Lando Norris is just way better than Max Verstappen right now, because the average price difference between different C-tier categories, and what I mean by that, I've sort of bunched up the C-tiers in different price categories. Sort of like, Lance Stroll is his own category because he's at 14.1 million. Then we have, the Ocons, the ones that are around 10 million, the Ocons, the Magnusens, the Yukis. Then we've jumped down, and then we get, to the Bottas and the Albons and the like. And the average price difference between C-tier categories is approximately 1.6 million. And that is what you could probably consider like an upgrade, right? If you want to upgrade a C-tier asset to a better C-tier asset, the average price you have to pay for that upgrade is approximately 1.6 million. And Norris is 4.8 million cheaper than Max Verstappen. The biggest upgrade from a C-tier is the 4 million from Lance Stroll down to the nearest C-tier asset, right? So you can just afford a free Lance Stroll upgrade, and I would probably not consider that. You can afford multiple other upgrades, including the 2.3 million difference from Sargeant up to a Zhou Guanyu. And I think that is where the biggest difference between someone like Lando Norris and Max Verstappen is. Will Max Verstappen outscore Lando Norris in Austria? Maybe. Actually, probably. I don't think Lando Norris is going to get the fastest lap again, but he will probably get driver of the day every second. He just keeps getting it, right? Maybe people will tire of it and switch and stop voting for him. Maybe, now that it's, come into the limelight, but I don't really see that. The people who vote in the driver of the day, there's a lot of casual fans voting, and those casual fans love Lando Norris and they hate Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen, even if he wins in Austria, is not going to get driver of the day. Lando Norris is going to get it if he's P2, mark my words, and maybe, unless, Hamilton goes from P11 to P3 or something, but most of the time Lando Norris is going to get it. And the main difference, even if Verstappen does outscore Lando Norris, those 4.8 million that you save from going with Norris over Max Verstappen can allow you to upgrade the likes of Logan Sargeant to where you skip them. I think Logan Sargeant is the worst asset, the worst driver asset in the game right now, and being able to dodge Logan Sargeant, that is what makes those two premium driver lineups so powerful. Let's finally move over then to talk about the next race, Austria. We've talked a lot about what happened in Spain, different talking points, and those conversations are going to continue as we begin talking about Austria. All these conversations, they sort of flow into each other. They all link together. They have things to do with each other. It's very hard to structure these videos. I've been trying for the past hour. It's looking like it's going to rain in Austria. It is not only a sprint race, it is looking like it's going to rain, which brings a whole different dimension to the game. We talked a bit about what would happen if it rained in Spain. It did not end up doing so. Rain in Austria seems more likely. This could obviously change, and then this entire conversation is completely obsolete. What does the rain mean? Well, let's first talk about, it is a sprint race. This is my sort of sprint graphic that I used early on in the season, with combined with the chips that I'm personally using. We've now reached Austria, and Austria being a sprint race means, here it comes, C-tier assets. If you're wondering about the Limitless chip, right? The Limitless chip specifically, I'm going to do an entirely separate video about that's dropping tomorrow, because that discussion in itself is about 30 minutes long. That's a whole, separate video, separate entity. Today, I'm not going to mention the Limitless at all. All I'm going to say is do not play it yet. Wait until after the sprint qualifying. It is not guaranteed that you should play it. Now let's talk about us who are not using the Limitless. What lineup should we go for? Should we go for the single A or B or the double B? Well, sprint races have this sort of conundrum, and this is something we're going to discuss in tomorrow's video as well. Take Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen qualifies first in sprint qualifying. He gets no points for that. Then he just goes and wins the sprint qualifying. He gets a total of 8 points for that. Now take drivers that we might actually afford with specifically our 2B lineups, things like Hamilton. Even if he does perform as well as he did in Spain, he qualifies in P3 in the sprint qualifying. He gets no points for that. Then he stays in P3, maybe he does an overtake or two, but he ends in P3. That is only 6 points in the sprints. Maybe he did an overtake, maybe he, someone overtook him at the start and then he took them back, so like he did in Spain. So let's give him a generous 1 overtake, maybe 2. Let's give him a generous 2 overtakes. That's 8 points again. These B tier assets have been so strong in this double B lineup because they get so much points, and a lot of the points that they get are from their placement, right? They get 15 whole points from getting third place, on top of any positions gained, any fastest lap, which they are also in the running of getting, right? Driver of the days for Lando Norris. But in the sprints, anyone can DNF at any point, really. You know, some drivers are more DNF prone for sure, but a DNF in a sprint is still minus 20 points. The only thing different about a sprint race is the points you get for placement. You still get 1 point for an overtake, 1 point for a positions gained. You don't get the points for DNFing is still minus 20. So these B tier assets who've been so strong and so powerful in the double B lineup in those other races, are they that good now? Well, I don't think so. Because take someone like Kevin Magnussen, one of the better C tier assets so far this season. Say he qualifies in P18, and then throughout the sprint, maybe 2 people DNF, 2 drivers DNF in the race. He's not one of them, and he moves up a total of 4 positions. And during that time, he gets 2 overtakes. So, you know, that fast Haas race pace, 2 overtakes, and then 4 positions gained. That's 6 points. That's what Hamilton got without overtakes in total. And we have a Kevin Magnussen who is infinitely cheaper than a Lewis Hamilton. So in the sprint race, in the sprint specifically, the C tier assets are actually way more powerful, in my opinion. Now you could argue that the C tiers are more likely to DNF, maybe because there's more of them, and maybe if you have a Logan Sargeant, a Lance Stroll. But if you have the correct C tier assets and those who are performing well right now, such as the Gaslys, the Occons, the Alpines are getting better. Stroll with the Aston still could do well if he doesn't DNF. But you can never really predict DNF. You always got to play the cards at your disposal, ignoring DNFs to a degree, right? And if you get it right with the C tiers, they are definitely better than the B tiers in sprint races, because they can get closer, right? Take someone with a double B. They have Hamilton and Leclerc, right? Yes, in the regular race, they're gonna get those big points, but those C tier assets, say I'm sitting with a Norris with the 4 drivers that I've got, right? Those C tiers, because they're equal points in the sprints, they're actually gonna be closer to those B tiers in points. The difference is not gonna be as great when we get to the actual race and the total result for the weekend, which means they are more likely to increase in price, which also means, you know, the difference between a single B and a double B lineup is less. That was a lot, but all that to say that, combined with the fact that it's going to rain, which usually brings about a lot of different overtakes. You know, look at Sandvort last year for a great example of that. Combined with that, I think the C tier assets are going to be really strong in Austria if you're not running the Limitless, because they allow you to run those big Lando Norris's, the best C tiers on the grid, those premium constructors, and you can even upgrade your constructors to something like a Red Bull, for example. So the strongest team in the sprint, you know, for Austria that's not Limitless, well, am I completely wrong to say that it's probably something like this, right? I have no Lance Stroll in there now because I need to afford the Red Bull Racing upgrade, and if you have more cost cap, a bigger budget than me, you can definitely afford a team like this. I'm running Mercedes still over Ferrari because Mercedes look faster than the Ferrari right now. Red Bull Racing in for those fastest pit stop points that they're still getting. Hopefully Checo doesn't crash. You have Lando Norris for the driver of the day DRS boost. And then what I would probably, you know, estimate to be the best C tier assets right now. I still think Yuki Tsunoda is strong, by the way, even though he's been lacking a bit recently. V-Carb's pace were concerning in Spain, but Ricciardo still increased in price, and Yuki Tsunoda still performed pretty well with a 4-pointer. So I think Yuki and Daniel are very close in value. So any of them could come away with a price hike. Something like this, I think, could be very, very powerful in Austria, because you're not going to be as far away from those 2B, from those limitless users. You might get less points, but you're going to be closer than you would be in a non-sprint race, which means that this could be the prime time to run a lineup like this, to chase budget, to then, after the sprint race, then move to the 2B lineups when we're no longer in a sprint. Because don't get me wrong, I still think the 2B lineup is better, and the 2B lineup is something we should be working towards, but we should be working towards the 2B lineup in a sense of avoiding Logan Sargeant, and perhaps not in Austria for the sprint, especially not if it's going to rain. A lot, I know. Let's now talk about what my actual plans are. Well, if you look at my real team, right? My real team is this. With 2 transfers out of my 3 free available, I could definitely move to a lineup like this. Get Pierre Gasly in because the Alpines are looking better, and then get Red Bull racing. I got a question on Twitter, and if you want to leave me a question, you can go follow me there and tweet at me something if you have something that you wish for me to discuss in one of these videos, to discuss the difference between the top 4 constructors. And I think it is very, very, very close. Ferrari is looking worse now. It's looking like the new Mercedes, but Mercedes and Ferrari are still very, very powerful as a combo because they are still B tier. They're, they don't need as many points to increase a lot in price. Now Ferrari needs to step up their game, but they did really, really well in Monaco, so I don't see why they could suddenly be good again. As for Red Bull and McLaren, I think Red Bull is really, really strong if Checo can just perform like a regular driver. McLaren is a bit worse, but only because I think Lando Norris is so good with the driver of the day points. I prefer Red Bull Racing over McLaren. I prefer Lando Norris over Max Verstappen. I think the Ferrari-Mercedes combo is perfectly fine, especially in those 2B lineups. I think you need a lot of budget to afford Red Bull Racing Mercedes plus 2 good B or A tier drivers without running Logan Sargeant. So I think the Ferrari-Mercedes combo is very, very strong for that. You still gain budget, and you can probably fit a really, really strong comp in. But I think Red Bull Racing is the strongest constructor points-wise, and probably should be, right? Mercedes look really, really powerful. It is looking better than Ferrari right now, but we'll see. That could definitely differ from weekend to weekend. So something like this is what I was instantly gravitating towards when thinking about what to do for my team. Will I go for it though? The problem with this team, yes, I leave a transfer in the bank, so I have 3 transfers then. How do I get from this in Silverstone to a 2B lineup? That is the question. I would probably switch back Red Bull Racing to Ferrari. Well, I definitely have to. Then I would probably need to remove the most expensive, maybe Ocon, and I would probably not want Logan Sargeant. So let's just take Shogun Yu, who's the second cheapest, right? Maybe it would be Bottas if Bottas does not increase in price in Shogun. You get it, but somewhere along the Shogun Yu price tag. And then what do I do? Well, let's remove, say, Yuki Tsunoda. For 18 million, I don't get any of the B tiers that I want. What I would have to do is also sell Lando Norris, and then, and only then, can I afford something like this, something like this. I think I can afford something with Charles Leclerc, yeah, and George Russell, just barely. I really like something like this as a combo for Silverstone onwards. It could even be double Mercedes if Mercedes look to continue their dominance over Ferrari. I could add Oscar Piastri in there if he's looking to pick it up. There's a lot of combos that I can fit with this combo. There's a lot of combos I can fit with this sort of structure. The problem, if you counted while I was doing this, is that's 4 transfers. I sold Red Bull, I sold Yuki Tsunoda, I sold Ocon, and I sold Norris. That is a -10. I could definitely do it. I don't have my wildcard, if you remember from the graphic earlier. I used that in Japan. Is it worth taking a -10 to get to this? it could be. This looks really strong. I have two really strong B-tier drivers with this. I still have Pierre Gasly, which I think is, it's looking like one of the better C-tier assets now that Alpine have gotten faster. Kevin Magnussen is still really, really strong with tracks where you can overtake. Shogun Yu is decent for the price. And I still have Ferrari and Mercedes that can gain me value. And then once these assets increase in value, then I could maybe look to fit a Lando Norris combo in the future. Right now I can only really do that with Logan Sargeant in there. So maybe if I want if Norris keeps getting driver of the day every single race, maybe I risk it with Logan Sargeant, but that's sort of where my issue is at. I could go in Austria for what I just showed you with Lance Stroll, Ferrari out, for Red Bull Racing and Gasly in, but then I can't get to that perfect 2B lineup in 3 moves in Silverstone. There are other options for sure. I could stick with Ferrari and just hope that Checo crashes, essentially. But then I'm stuck with 6.5 million. Do I really want to sell Lance Stroll? Well, maybe I keep Lance Stroll then and sell Yuki. That could be an option. So I do this, right? This looks pretty good. Lance Stroll, Yuki Tsunoda. If VCarb are bad, perhaps Lance Stroll's good. Lance Stroll is definitely more crash prone, I would imagine. But this does not look like a bad lineup, and I keep Ferrari. And then if I want to switch to a 2B lineup from here, I can do so. Let's get my preferred lineup here of like Oscar Piastri, Lewis Hamilton. Now I can fit in a Shogun Yu here with 3 moves since I haven't done the Red Bull move. I think Red Bull are really, really good. I would like to have them. But if I want to avoid that -10 in the future, then I have to probably stick to something like I just showed you, where I ignore my constructors, I stick with Ferrari and Mercedes, and then I only move about my cheaper drivers. If you didn't notice, that also burns a transfer, right? I only use 1 transfer, Yuki Tsunoda down to Pierre Gasly, and then nothing else. If I don't trust someone like a Lance Stroll, I could do like a Bottas right now and then be a transfer ahead, but then I'm leaving 8.1 million in the bank, and that just doesn't feel great. So doing this leaves me with 2 transfers, which means I burn 1 transfer, but I also don't have to take the -10 to get to a 2B lineup that I would want come Silverstone. So a lot of things to think about. Once we get to the deadline stream, I'm probably going to do a similar comparison to what I did before, where I sort of valued, will I get 10 points extra? Will I earn up those 10 points by running Red Bull over Ferrari? Because that's essentially what this transfer is about. Will Red Bull in a sprint earn more than 10 points more than Ferrari? I think they might, and perhaps then it is worth it to take the -10. Could I get away with running the single B lineup in Silverstone? I don't really want to do that. I want to switch to a 2B lineup soon. But what I could do then, say I go for, it's a lot of rambling now, but there are points to this, right? Say I go to the Red Bull Racing and the Pierre Gasly now in Austria, and then I have 1 free transfer left, so I have 3 free transfers in Silverstone. When we get to Silverstone, I do the switchback to Ferrari, and then sell whichever C2 driver looks the worst back to Lance Stroll, save another transfer, and then in Hungary, then I use 3 transfers. So I keep Norris in Silverstone and hope Norris wins, right? And then in Hungary, only then do I use 3 free transfers to switch to the 2B lineup. Okay, are you with me? I sort of have 3 different options. I can either run the single A, the single premium lineup for 2 more races in Austria and in Silverstone. Or I could take a -10 to get Red Bull over Ferrari in Austria. Or I run Ferrari in Austria and avoid the -10 in Silverstone. Those are my 3 options, and I do not know which I will go for. I really like the aggressive move of selling Ferrari to Red Bull, specifically in Austria, because Red Bull and Verstappen have been so dominant there the past few years that it would just feel good to have them, if that makes sense. So there are options, definitely. We will see which one I go for. I will discuss that more both in my final team selection video, which will be out on Friday after sprint qualifying, but also in the sprint qualifying stream and in the deadline stream on Saturday. Alright, a lot of things. The Limitless video will be out tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed this video. I think it was a pretty long one, so if you're here still, thank you so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I will have better graphics for my personal plans in my team selection video, so don't miss that on Friday. Thank you so much for watching. I'm signing out now. Goodbye.